Morena koutou. It's like I'm back at school. Put your hands up soon to listen. No. Morena koutou. No mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. Me karakia timatanga. Whakatakata hau ki te uru. Whakatakata hau ki te tonga. Ke mā kina ki uta. Ke mā taratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te atukura. E te hoka hi hau. Te hei Māori ora. Ko wai au, e he huru hau no Naitahu, ko Blair Johnstone tōku ingoa he kai atu hau UC Māori i te whare wānanga o Waitaha. Mōrena everyone, it's lovely to have an opportunity to welcome you to this staff hui this morning. My name's Blair Johnstone, I'm the Director of UC Māori, and as for those who've been part of the staff hui recently, in terms of where we sit as partnership, as part of the Office of Treaty Partnership. So it's my pleasure to be here as a representative of the Office of Treaty Partnership this morning. We just really want to acknowledge the opportunity the Office of Treaty Partnership has had with Te Kaupeka Puhanga, the Faculty of Engineering, in relation to the collaboration in the development of Rautaki 2030. The Office of Treaty Partnership are pleased to endorse this strategy, which clearly aligns with the aspirations of Ngāi Tahu and recognises the significance of indigenous knowledge and wisdom, and working very, very closely together. And it's my pleasure now to hand over to Saurabh.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Saurabh toku ingoa no Afrika ki te tonga ahu, ko amamatua ahu ki te Kaupeka Puhanga. No reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see a great turnout despite the weather outside. Maybe the weather is helping too. My name is Saurabh, serving as Executive Dean, and my greatest appreciation to Blair. As you can see, he had a shoulder. It had nothing to do with the strategy, though. and so thanks, Blair, for joining despite that. This is I think, the first strategy in the region when it comes to engineering that is done in conjunction with the Office of Treaty Partnership. And we are really proud that we've been able to arrive together in this. And I'm also really grateful because it's been an approach that has been really journeyed through our staff within the faculty, which I'll acknowledge in a bit. Just starting initially with some words of gratitude, as this strategy has really, the process started sometime in November last year, and we had Pivot and Pace helping us with the steering committee within the faculty, but also supported by the central strategy and planning team, as well as right from the outset, Office of Treaty Partnership. We went through a process of multiple design thinking workshops, which engaged communities across the university. We know that today's success in anything that deals with engineering can only be when there is a great nexus with other parts of the institution, both in terms of support but also academic areas. And so it all came together. So just wanted to once again say thank you to many of you who are in this room that participated in this process. The assignment that we had received was to design a strategy that is aligned with wider institution, tangata tū, tangata ora, engaged, empowered, making a difference. And so, as you can imagine, when you give an assignment like this to an engineering faculty, things, especially if you have a school of mathematics embedded, things will find some level of function, a linear expression. And so that's more or less where it started. And we've, of course, looked at texts such as Design for Century, which I'll speak to in a bit. But the equations need to, don't worry, I only have another 30 slides, so it will develop. So the equations then developed with the function, with epsilon introduced. Because as you know, engineering faculties have always known to have an additional factor. Sometimes it's called noise, and others we believe is creative thinking. I told you, I did promise you some more slides on this. So the faculty potential and the engagement had to be embedded in. But what was also important in that integral function and integration, so I've moved too fast now, is the time factor. We are a faculty that initiated, our School of Engineering initiated in 1887, And so it's quite a journey, and there's been exceptional success that has been built over the years. The last equation has got something to do with that exponential function, which is, can be a bit challenging. But what it basically says is that if you have strategies, if you don't have continuous renewals in terms of strategic and catalytic initiatives, the strategy does find, kind of diminishes like that exponential function. So we have to make sure that we have constant rejuvenation in terms of implementation approaches. So we learned a bit in terms of our past, at least I did, because I had moved over here in last July. And so looking at the history has been quite inspiring about the university. And the first text was the first 100 years of the university, written 1973, published 1973. Gardner and Carter, and interested, good examples from the works that the School of Engineering, as it was called then, had done. And you would appreciate there's the Kerr's work, which was the mathematical validation of Einstein's equation, much more leading to initiated by curiosity-driven work, and then more recent works on techniques such as base isolation, which was done in civil engineering. And as you know, that some of those techniques are used globally. In fact, we're having a conference right now in the domain of concrete and structures, and I believe some folks are actually here for that as well. And so that just gives an example of how this continues to renew. And Design for a Century was a text written specifically about engineering school in 1987, celebrating 100 years of the school. Both texts had a common author, Beardsley, who also then looked at the history in terms of the School of Engineering was initiated just around the second industrial revolution, around when electricity was coming up as a prominent area. And then it evolved, and there were some really amazing features. And I think one of the features that was in 1897 was around volunteer work that engineering students would do, and it continues to be very strong today. And the other aspect that these two texts also covered was the Spanish flu, 1918, because there was a pandemic at that time. And then the New History, which is the more recent 150 years, published last year. John Wilson was the author, and he also brings about some coverages around more recent events such as the COVID-19, and then, of course, the earthquakes, which had a major impact. But the last text also starts to bring about aspects of other industrial revolutions, particularly during COVID-19. Digital transformation played a major role, but it also showed that universities had quite strong capability in moving forward with innovation. Universities are often designated as organizations that are too slow to move. And during the COVID time, the universities around the world actually proved something different. A lot of, resulting from the earthquake, there were a lot of new technology areas, liquefaction data and things, all of that has been a major part that the university has also contributed to. So it does mean that we're actually excellent in many ways. And we've, of course, do remain as in the top 250 when it comes to the engineering and technology. And there are aspects around ranking which does continue to challenge us, and there are all views about ranking, whether it's good or not. I won't go too much into detail. After all, it is a public holiday tomorrow. But it's clear that there is an excellence vibe that remains strong, and we are very grateful because it is the collaborative community of the university which is a very key enabler into our journey. When you are in that space, you then start having to look at, why excellence is not enough. And here there are two questions that were posed in the book Soul of a University. And these two questions, the first question deals with, what are we experts at? What is, the question of excellence, and it's linked to expertise. And the second question deals with what should we be good for. And it's interesting because if you ask in most of our teams the first question, you actually have very quick answers that will be based on publications. But when you say, what are we good for, then there's not, you actually start to ponder a bit about it. And there will be very quickly different answers to that. So the second question really deals with the question of purpose. And we, of course, have the general ideas in terms of employability, but that's kind of the reflective aspect. So it's really about moving from that great to that exceptional angle. So going back to the uni strategy, the broader strategy has people, research, and education as a key component and engagement at its center. And the question was these two different stages in terms of developing the plan and some of the catalytic initiatives. We are kind of in between these two stages, probably about 1.34. So I need to bring in a couple of engineering aspects to the pitch. Anyway, so going back here is that these were some of the stakeholders that were engaged, and it was actually in this process that we felt that we can actually do more in terms of the Office of Treaty Partnership. And so that was part of the process. Some images from the process, including student engagement that we started with right at the beginning, and engagement with the Ngāi Tahu strategy partners. We also had processes internal to the faculty, so we changed our leadership meeting format to align better with the university strategy of people, education, and research. But separate to that, we also started to invite teams from other parts of the world. We had the lead of innovation at MIT engage us about their technology transfer journey and how they went about doing it and how they've sustained a position. And I think it was quite interesting because when I reached out to Tim, who's a good friend of mine and is in the space there, and I said, well, Canterbury, and he said, oh, cool. When did you move to UK? And so, then I'm sure it happens, right? Yeah. So then when we started to engage, and like, oh, you folks seem to be doing great work, and so it was quite interesting to actually see that coming from other parts. Johns Hopkins University on the industry-led PhDs. Arizona State had created the first online program in electrical engineering at the bachelor's level, which is accredited by ABIT, which is in Washington Accord signatory, as we are here in New Zealand, and Purdue University, which has really done amazing when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And I think they've achieved a lot of it because they introduced a course in the mid-90s called Engineering Projects in Community Service, which created a lift for the engineering profession in terms of the purpose orientation of engineering being a lot more pronounced to pre-university students, and that then started to get more diverse groups into it. So over time, over the last 3 decades, a lot of data and published work has been published on this as well. And as you know, among academic communities, if you want to prove and disapprove something, you have peer-reviewed papers, but you often need to put together a set of peer-reviewed papers to see what is the panel view. And so that was good learning, and we were able to engage with these folks as part of our process as well. So what comes clear is very strong technical emphasis that we have, and learning by doing is something that our industry partners tell us quite a bit. And so we did a quick look at what's happening around the world, and I'm going to go through some of the next slides fairly quickly. So the first one was looking at the University of California in Berkeley, and the stuff that's in purple, which is close to our faculty colors. The elements that is in red are areas that we can do more of. We are doing them, but maybe the foregrounding aspect is something that we could do a bit more on. So interdisciplinary comes there, social commitment, serving society, community, entrepreneurs. Still at California, Berkeley, technology saving the world, entrepreneurship, working in multidisciplinary teams. Stanford, again, seeking solutions to important global problems, educating leaders, thousands of companies still at Stanford, technology transfer as a key angle, Stanford was looking at new curriculum, which brings more a multidisciplinary component, changing the world. MIT, again, a lead player in the engineering space, again, exceptional community, the aspect of graduating leaders, not only engineers, serving society, social problems. Again, at MIT, life sciences emphasized within an engineering context, biomedical science and engineering. This is something we do quite strong. We have got a lot of strength in these areas. There were some, what one would say is a little unusual in engineering programs, such as combination of CS and molecular biology, for example. And if we think about it, flexible electronics, some of you we're probably wearing some of those, so that's starting to be. Imperial College, very similar to our approaches here. ET at Zurich results into practice. ET at Zurich also did some other things which were interesting. For example, they aligned their resourcing plan to align with the global grand challenges, as it was called some years ago. So things like energy, water, sanitation, gender, those were elements there. So fairly big changes in terms of their resourcing approach. Tsinghua University, social commitment, creativity. There's a whole array of other institutions that we also looked at. But just to give you an idea of the benchmarking. So what this also points to is, how the world has been changing over time. And a point that I think is a more recent moment of pause and observation for me was that when the Nobel Prizes took place in physics and chemistry, and when you kind of think of a Nobel Prize in chemistry, you expect people that are there all coming from a chemistry background. And I know there's variations of chemistry, but this year we saw something quite different. I think we saw people from computer science, in chemistry, we saw in Nobel Prize in physics, in machine learning and deep learning. So it almost appears that there are shifts that are taking place. And if one uses that as one singular lens, that even some of the fundamentals have a shift coming up. So the fourth industrial revolution where we are right now, digital technologies and AI has been quite strong. And when it comes to the fifth industrial revolution, so I recognize that the definitions here have its challenges, because this is more the definition from the European Commission, which is towards more sustainable, resilient, and human-centric industry. But there's a human component that gets more pronounced. When you think about machine learning on one end, you think about machine unlearning on another end, which is still a technology area. And so that's kind of the space that when we start to think between these areas, then those are the disciplines that we start to find in place. The tech predictions reports, there are different ones of these. They all tend to pronounce things like digital transformation, artificial general intelligence, and sustainability. We are also going through changes in our accreditation right now, as the Engineering New Zealand, the most recent criteria, has a new graduate attribute, which is engineer and the world. And that's a graduate attribute that we, for the next re-accreditation in 6 years. By the way, that feels good, because we just recently had a re-accreditation. That was a month ago. We're still waiting for the report. Apparently it's due today. It might have flown into the inbox in the last couple of minutes. But the verbal feedback was quite positive. But the next means that we actually have to put mechanisms in place now to have some of the changes. Busy slide, but that's really the summary of the slide. Is that this image? Some of you may not like it, and I'm also not too comfortable with them. It's generated by AI, so clearly flaws have to be in the tech space too, right? So discipline. So essentially, that in a nutshell, we're really looking at the strong technical component, and it's the societal positioning of engineering, which we are doing. It's the foregrounding which is coming across as in terms of the process. So when we were doing the vision exercise, it was becoming clear that we could very quickly craft a vision for engineering, and other faculties would do the same. And imagine people engaging with us from the outside, they will really, be confused with the various visions. So we retain the university vision in this particular positioning of engaged, empowered, making a difference, tangata tu tangata ora. When it came to the values, the same approach here. The values was interesting because the design thinking process, or the workshops and the surveys did indicate that, the old saying of culture eats strategy for breakfast, that the aspects relating to culture, particularly diversity and inclusion, is an area that the faculty needs to do a lot more work on, both on the staff side as well as the student side. And I think what was most pronounced was the aspect of gender diversity. And actually other forms of diversity as well, but gender came across as the most prominent one. So the mission of the engineering mission is to foster knowledge creation and learning in engineering and allied disciplines, as you appreciate that engineering also has a school of mathematics, computing, product design, and forestry. And when we looked at allied disciplines, it's also about areas that may be outside of engineering, the role that humanities, social sciences, law, and business play in what we do today, empowering graduates to address local and global challenges sustainably while embedding indigenous values and wisdom, which is what Blair spoke to earlier. I do want to recognize that there was a lot of effort that went in with the different teams, marketing, communications, that engaged. And you will see, if you're looking at the strategy document, it's online, and we have some hard copies if anyone is keen. Was that there was a lot of emphasis of having students, as we play a major role, students and staff in the document first. And if you go through the pages, you'll notice the trend. As Tim doing a presentation on the structures lab. So the three goals that are: one is amplifying research-led education to create a collaborative, interdisciplinary, inclusive ecosystem of learning. Two is the intentionality about selecting the societal challenges, the question about good for. And third is the aspect of sustainable partnerships across our networks. So in terms of goal one, so each of these goals has then sub-goals, which is listed in the document, and around that we're looking at certain programmatic enablers, which I'll discuss in a bit. So the first one, dealing with amplifying research-led education, integrating aspects of the discovery process, projects that are not only about teaching, but having project-based experiences. Foregrounding the sustainable development goals. We do that at the moment, but it's some courses we do it more, sometimes less. But then also looking at critiques around the sustainable development goals in a balanced way. Some of the goals are sometimes a bit, you have productivity, you have climate, sometimes feels contradictory. So how do we use the lenses of innovation and the way that we approach them? What are geopolitical implications? And the geopolitical does actually matter. Recent changes just in the US and China might have implications for us here. The motivating, so these were the goals. I'm not going to read them all, but things like you will see in the next slide, the next goal, we talk about research, innovation, and commercialization. So if you have to bring that back in the education space, then we have students that would graduate with great capability in CV development and so on, but we don't always have students graduating with also capability of a business plan. Students will graduate not because everyone is going to start a business, but when you do work for an organization, you have the component of entrepreneurship, but you also have entrepreneurship with an I, and that's about leading within a big organization through innovation and fostering collaboration across. So we'd like our students to have an experience, that kind of mixed experience. So that's just an example of what might come out of that of this particular area, and then in the aspect about motivating and supporting our staff, ensuring great culture, and then of course the equitable environment that I mentioned. The interdisciplinary themes are also listed here. These are some of the ones that emerged during the conversations. And what we are seeing is that, for example, Christchurch NZ also has cluster areas, and those cluster areas are starting to map into some of these thematic areas. Then the second goal is to deal with the impact of societal, the impacting societal challenges. Developing global awareness, expertise, and leadership impact around the world. We are the aspect of ranking is explicitly mentioned here. Ranking is a very contested topic. And however, the way we have seen it is that if we are trying to grow, especially when it comes to international student numbers, for areas of the world that we're looking to recruit, ranking does matter. And so we have to look at, how does questions that make meaning in our local environment actually enable for that global and local lift in terms of ranking. And so that's why it does have a feature. We've been working with the Naitaho Research Center, and we're looking at a joint appointment and a team that would work collaboratively in the areas of infrastructure and environment. So that will then bring about case studies that integrate into the different parts of the engineering curriculum or pedagogically, such that the aspect of indigenous knowledge is something that we can further appreciate and bring about. There's also components of the curiosity-driven innovation and entrepreneurship. So that's looking at, technology transfer aspects, but it's also looking at engaging industry at the outset in terms of defining problems and then going about having that mapping into our curriculum, but also into our research. We have aligned with the priority research themes of the university, the broader university. They are quite broad, and sometimes we'll be able to fit into more than one. Like technology for humanity. What we have noticed is that the Christchurch NZ clusters do also have an alignment, and so we're looking at how to bring about that mapping. But the key thing here is that foregrounding the impact and locally relevant and the globally competitive aspect. There's another mathematical equation. I see a couple of mathematicians here, and I fear they might be getting bored with the words. Sustainable partnerships, which is the third goal. This is about, we've got good relationships with alumni in industry and business and communities. The faculty has got really strong links with industry. We've got multiple industry advisory boards. Our industry advisory boards are very focused on education. By design, for many years, that was a key feature, particularly, I think, post the earthquake, because it was a way that engineering could play a significant role when it comes to infrastructure. The aspect of research and partnering with a view of external funding is something that we have done more on an ad hoc basis, so there's room for us to do a bit more there. And I'll give you an example of a question that, the space sector, New Zealand is really well recognized, number 4 globally when it comes to the number of rockets that are launched into space. So that's a good example from a tech and impact and economic side. If we ask the same question to our manufacturing sector locally, that if they were to become the space industry in, say, 10 years, what would be the delta that's needed for that achievement to attain, and how, as a major player in the region, how could we become that learning partner? So that then maps into, how do we look at an industry co-funded academic or position? How do we bring in more industry fellows in a deliberate way in certain areas, so that between different engagements? And so, those were some of the kind of, so the relationships are there. It's about taking the relationship to the next level. That's really where this has come about. The enhancing our reputation, looking at policy contributions in addition to research outputs, and having some kind of recognition for those policy contributions when they emerge, and then, of course, broadening the opportunities for international students and staff, international partnerships, looking at universities that may be doing well, for example, in SDG 9, which deals with innovation infrastructure. At the same time, looking at universities that may be doing well on gender, which is another SDG, and then looking at how do we bring those and how do we partner with those universities that may be leading in some of those spaces, especially when it comes to engineering. So those would be the strategic angles in terms of partnering. We have been working on, I did mention the partnerships. So I'm now going into some steps of implementation, but I'll be finishing off soon. So the academic programs, because strategy, you do have to have aspects that are bringing it into implementation. Otherwise, I'm sure you have recognized strategies that are usually books and tend to reside on cabinets with some dust afterwards. So fortunately, with the changes in the Eng New Zealand in terms of graduate attribute, new graduate attribute, it gives us one area where we could bring in a global humanitarian engineering, and of course at the same time doing, taking an across an approach both laterally and horizontally. But this is much more a project-based approach. We also had the opportunity to engage with the Pacific strategy as it was developed just before ours, and so we could learn and integrate some of the goals into our approach. So the stuff again in purple areas we're doing quite well. Some stuff in the areas of red we can do more on. Things like leadership and professional development in the era of digital transformation, that would be a staff capability area. And then whenever we think about AI in conjunction with humanities and social sciences, and I have talked about some of the other aspects. So in terms of the call to action, many of these actions are internal to the faculty, but because we work so close within a university community as a family, that some of these may be interesting because we will, of course, engage with you in the different areas. So we are looking, so there's the marathon and then there's sprint and marathon items. So the marathon items, research committee moving into the area of research, innovation and commercialization committee, learning and teaching committee into learning, teaching and engagement. Diversity and equity is currently a standalone committee, so we're looking at retaining it as standalone, but then also having a horizontal feature across the learning and teaching and research. The postgraduate committee moving into postgraduate and international committee. See, Monique and the team are here, and I know the difference on transnational and international, but it's complex. So for simplicity, we've kept it as internationalization. And that's about looking at coursework development and transnational pathways to have groups of students look at New Zealand as an option for furthering their studies, but then also vice versa in terms of our students looking at opportunities elsewhere. There are changes happening right now with the way that internships and things work within our own environment, which may actually mean that students would need to continue to look at opportunities locally, but would also need to look at, for their own experience and development, at options in other parts of the world. The industry advisory, there's a lot of changes going on here, looking at alumni as a more pronounced group here. We're looking at changes with lots of industry advisory committees within the faculty, and we're looking at a way of bringing a common platform for the different groups to come together, and at the same time look at key instruments. So for example, they may be saying, well, professor of practice, how do we define that? What does it mean? How do we incentivize it? How do we create an adjunct avenue? What does it mean? Does it mean 2 days on campus every week and 3 days elsewhere? So those would be some examples of areas where we will get advice, and vice versa. Industry may say, well, this is the area of manufacturing, there's cybersecurity, these are the things that we would like to see. How does that then become into a micro-credential if it's need to be on an online area? Online education is obviously quite pronounced. And then we're also thinking about an awards and recognition, because we did see that we have a much more an ad hoc approach, whereas, if we have a group, and I'm kind of thinking of an emeritus colleague who might be able to assist, and I'm very appreciative that there are a couple of emeritus professors here today. So if you're listening and want to join, that might be, of course others will also be involved in this. The idea here is to be much more purposeful in terms of recognizing, because things like ranking and things do like those type of things, and I know it's sometimes challenging with different cultural contexts. So we're also looking at an innovation tournament within the faculty, but it'll be open broadly because industry might also, and you might also have some ideas. But the idea here is that sometimes one only engages with people in positional leadership because that's the way structures work. But good ideas reside in unstructures, not always in structures. No offense to people who are from structural engineering, because I know you guys like that stuff. Because I always get like, oh, we're a big department, we have to have structures. But I also want to say that I have often seen that really, really great ideas come from an idea of someone who's been doing something and not always visible, is not a person that you'll see talking at a meeting. But that it's because of that person that things have been happening in that corridor or the domain, and we want to be able to see how can we bring in their learning into that. So that's the idea of this innovation tournament. We're going to do it initially online and then find space for some in-person engagements around that. And then, I've talked about the joint appointments, catalytic initiatives, and then some resourcing direction and redirection in line with the aspect of the question of purpose and impact. So that is really the presentation on the strategy. And if you want to use the QR code, you'd be able to download it straight. I do want to recognize there were a lot of people that were really involved in really the fine details. If you look at the image there, the navigation that's taking place with the stars, if you look at our lines, the mountains in terms of what one needs to do to go to climb the next areas, a lot of effort that went into by different teams in the uni that contributed to designing this. I would have never been able to think of some of these things, and I'm really appreciative to that. And so on page 7 of this document is really the summary of this. And as you page through, you will see students starting and having initial discussions, and towards the end you will see them graduate, which brings about a key meaning for what we do and for the employability sector. So that's really the strategy, and so thank you very much for that, and I'll be opening for some questions. Yeah. Yeah, feel free to ask any question you'd like. You can't make it this easy for me. I spared a whole 20 minutes for questions. Rob?
So on one of your formulas, I think there was an error.
Oh. Yeah. That must be the epsilon.
So, but I do have a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned alignment with other strategies at the university, which I think is really good. The question with science. So science is another really large faculty. Is there coordination between engineering and science, because there's so much overlap with things that we do, and all the gnarly problems are going to require definitely science and engineering to look at. So I'm just wondering what the relationship is between engineering and science in terms of laying out strategy.
Yeah, I should say that the science teams were quite engaged in terms of the development process. I saw Deirdre somewhere, but she was part of the processes as well. Quite a few colleagues joined, and so that has helped us right from the outset. What was probably in the design thinking process was that we were already getting projects arriving, as it often happens, and we thought that as a good signal, because that means that when we're looking at, we're at the moment looking at a research index for different departments, and we already have the science team, which will be part of actually our next leadership team meeting. So that's been a good approach. And for the technology transfer discussion, for example, the science team was already in it. So I think that what I have seen in strategy processes in the past, I see just by coincidence, George van Rakis is here, who's from Johannesburg. He's here for the conference, is that if you involve the teams during the strategy development process, and it takes then a lot more time when it comes to the implementation areas, they already have some thoughts that they had been waiting because there's a process going on. And so we're looking at some of those realizations. For instance, the NITAHO Research Partnership is very much, it's around a complex area around mining, which should have voices from the humanities, it should have voices from the social sciences. And it has, if you think, you've got chemical leaching and you speak with teams in science, they would say, well, maybe bioleaching is another option. These are the cost implications. This is what the long-term implications are. So we've had a good, very collegial approach, and I'm really grateful because I can see some of the team members are here from science. Monique?
You know that meme or gif of the really confused-looking woman with the equation on the blackboard? That was me throughout most of the first few slides.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I'm really interested, obviously, in the global engagement and the work your team has done to look outwards. What's going on in New Zealand at other engineering schools, and has that played a part in what you've done?
It has played a part because we looked at all universities, of course, and we also looked at University of Auckland. And as it often happens, I won't tell you, don't repeat this, but just between us, I do have a metric where I look at how many students and whether there's an exponential growth from one city in the country. And we did have very good teams go out this year to engage, because the way I looked at it is that we obviously engage locally in Christchurch, and we do quite well here. But the way I thought about it was that if we're able to increase our numbers from Auckland in particular, then we're really doing a major, and again, don't repeat this, but see, I had the an engagement recently with a person who leads a major board at the University of Auckland, and it's quite major, so I can't say more. But his son came over to the open day. So this is not necessarily by design, but it's the way it worked out, was that we had academics obviously engage with the parents and with students. But in the labs, we had alumni or recent graduates engage in the lab space. So the dad tells me that he just doesn't know what to do because the son wants to move over. And it looks like the engagement of the son with the intergenerations and the students that were involved in the student clubs, and I'm sure that they talked about both the engineering and the social life. But this combination has really now kind of clinched the deal. So it's been interesting. So what we have a lot to do in terms of our peer institutions with transnational. On a more serious note, the dual degrees at the University of Auckland with institutions in Australia. I actually met again with a student this morning who's opted in for a aerospace program there because they have a joint offering at a doctorate level with a university in Australia. So I think that a new program with Washington Accord at a master's level is something that University of Auckland has done. The universities in Australia have been doing it for a while, and we have a real good plan around a online master's in software engineering, which we think will have major impact. So we do actually look at, but I must also recognize that we do collaborate quite extensively within the area. The University of Auckland is still a very major partner, and in fact their team will be here on the 10th of December as we engage with them and groups from Canada in terms of building transnational. So the team in Canada is keen on having a minor programs which are of strength here and vice versa. So we've got quite a few things. But the good news, as you can hear in all of this, is that there's a lot that we can still do. Erasmus Mundus joint programs at the master's level. So imagine if I was here and Monique asked me this question and everything that could be done has been done. It would be a difficult position, isn't it? And the good news is that there is a lot that we can still do. Yeah.
From a humanities and social science perspective, this is really innovative and exciting and full of possibilities. I'm just wondering if the next step for interdisciplinarity is maybe some internal to university but outward-looking think tanking type opportunities that are both formal and informal, that we could put out white papers and use the strategy for that next level across the university as a possibility. What we set out here is a benchmark and really for the rest of the university to follow.
Well, I appreciate your advice, and I think we'll pick up an approach around a seminar so that we have engagement from the teams on how that, we could have some co-creation. I think that there is some space opening around the new graduate attribute, which lends quite strongly into that. And there's a lot going on. I mean, I was looking at the new tech predictions that's coming up from another process, and the things that are there surprises us. Machine learning, data feudalism, and whole areas that you wouldn't expect in a conventional tech, and that those areas really open up when you have the closeness with the arts and the other parts of the uni. Further questions, thoughts, advice? No. looking at each other. Okay, that's maybe a good sign. So thanks very much again for joining this morning. We are really open for engagement. If you have questions that you think about, you can always reach out to me on email. We will have a team that will be involved in the implementation, and so that team's details will always also be shared, and so that we continue our journey with you in the next couple of years. And so thank you, and enjoy the day tomorrow as well, for the extra day on the public holiday. Thank you.